Hey, what is up guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7. So NTRL, my own racing league, which has been running for pretty much almost a year at this point, at least coming on that way, is running one of its offshoot leagues in today's video, the GT Open League, which takes place every other Saturday evening. It's a 6-rounder league and it'll kind of, continue like that for the foreseeable future. It's 16 individual cars, so although some of the manufacturers might be the same, every single car is going to be individual and running the typical BOP. There's no teams in this league, it's going to be pretty much an individual championship only, so we won't be running like our kind of gold, silver and bronze system for this one. It's just purely individual based, no classes, again all running group 3 manufacturer cars, and each car must be individual, so there'll be no repeat vehicles in this league. So we're going to be running our first round of the season at the Red Bull Ring in Austria. Obviously a bit of a speed track really, so it's going to really cater towards most of those cars. However, we do have dynamic weather on this race, so instead of the usual RM and RH, kind of required tyre compounds, it is going to be open, which means the soft could be run in qualifying and at any time during the race if it was dry. So let's get straight into it with round 1. So we're going to have Turbo Boy on pole, which means he's picked up the bonus point for putting it on pole position early on in the Peugeot RCZ. Now it's going to be a great start by him. This track really suiting that little Peugeot, absolutely down to the ground. Certainly one of the more stable cars of the bunch. And as you can see, he's almost leapfrogged everybody straight away. He is one of the bravest cars on the grid, running the soft compound of tyres, whereas most other people ran the mediums. And then you do have a couple of cars like my own personal Mercedes there, running the hard compound of tyre. I believe it was only myself in P2 to begin with, and one of the I think bike markers, which was the McLaren, that was running the hard compound of tyres and trying to basically one-stop the race. Now there is dynamic weather, so that will come into play at some point during the race, but whether Gran Turismo 7 gods decide that it's going to be a long bunch of rain or just a short amount really is to be seen. So we're going to go through the grid currently. We've got Coda trying to make a few moves. Now he did miss qualifying, which meant he had to start from the back, and he got himself all the way up to P8 before going for a nice little spin in the SLS. We already have Tomahawk, who had probably his best qualifying ever, all the way down in P15 due to a spin, a little bit of contact early on between himself and I believe Jace, essentially spun the Corvette around, and then finally we do have the McLaren, which had a bit of a moment into turn 1 with a few traction issues. So coming up to end lap 1, and Turbo Boy is pretty much dominating already. He's got a massive gap for a single lap over the Ferrari of Timo in P2. So it's looking like early on that nobody's realistically going to be catching that Peugeot, at least in the early stages, as everybody else is running the medium compound of tyres, and well, tyre deg really isn't too harsh here at the Red Bull Ring. We also have the M6 up in P3 and myself in the Mercedes on the hard tyre running in P4, so it's almost certain that I will drop back during the race. It's kind of to be expected, so I'm not going to waste time battling cars. If they're going to get past, they're going to get past. My hope is that I can essentially just get to the middle of the race, box in, and then do a single stop and get myself going. As we look down the grid, we've got the likes of the GTR just a little bit back. I'm not quite sure what happened to Danky Zeb there, but he has dropped off, and we already have Tommy Hawk making his way up through the grid as he gets himself into P14, just up ahead of Coda the Dragon, who also had a bit of a early moment, as you saw in the SLS. So he's going to have a little bit of a battle with the Corvette. It's actually going to restart later on in the race, and then we do also have the McLaren again still at the back. So on to lap 3 now, and it's beginning to become a little bit darker out there. We do have the lights on the cars now completely as night begins to fall, and as you can see, the Mercedes just dropping back into the clutches of the likes of the Supra and the Porsche 911. Again, like I mentioned earlier, being on the hards and the other cars basically being on the mediums, it's just going to kind of be a matter of when, not kind of if, they overtake. In all honesty, the Supra, again, a very good car for its top speed, and while that's going to go straight down the inside and get the move done on my Mercedes pretty early, as Professor Smiles gets that one done nice and early before we go on to lap 4. Then just behind myself, we do have Jace in the Porsche 911 RSR, who's going to get a much quicker run out of that final corner and be able to get up alongside me into turn 1 as we try and get that position back there, but it's just not going to happen. happen. So going back on board with myself, this is the view from me as we go on to lap 4, basically just trying to chase down the likes of Jace and the Supra that have overtook us. Essentially what we're hoping for is that we can stay in the slipstream for as long as possible to kind of get pulled along the track and you know, get as shorter lap times as possible really. Obviously the hard compound of tyre was probably on average anywhere from 2 to 2.5 seconds a lap slower than the likes of, you know, Turbo Boy was on average on the softs, and around about 1.5 seconds to the mediums on any other car, apart from that McLaren that was at the back. A little bit later on we've got Jay Mira, who's gone for a little bit of a spin towards the end of lap 4. That's going to allow the Toyota Supra, the Porsche 911 and myself back through, but it's not really going to be worth fighting for too long, as obviously he gets himself going again on that medium compound of tyre. So as we go with the run up the hill into the right hander here, he's going to have the inside line and he's going to pretty much have that one nice and done very early. We are going to try and come back at him, but to be quite honest, it's just not going to happen. We just cannot get the power down out of the corner with these hard compounds of tyres. So we're again just going to kind of tuck into the slipstream and get pulled along. Professor Smiles is going to have a bit of a moment later on, catching both Mira, myself as well, basically ending up in the back of Mira, and we are going to manage to get away with that one for a little bit. So Jay Mira's now got to do a bit of a recovery drive as he drops all the way to P9 after that bit of an off with Professor Smiles, as well as Professor Smiles ending up all the way down in P12 after he manages to finally recover the Supra out of the wall. So it's going to be on to lap 6 next, and well, again we're just a sitting duck for the likes of the Ford GT driven by Viper here, as he manages to get into our slipstream and essentially pull himself along, ready to make the move on any single straight we go on to. So again, we're just not going to have the speed through the corners. Again, this was another car that was basically running the medium compounds of tyres, and once again at the same corner that the Supra did, the Ford GT is going to get itself through. We are going to try and fight back, but again it's just easier for us to tuck in, ride in that slipstream and essentially get pulled along for as many laps as possible before the Ford GT will inevitably clear us and be, you know, free of the slip really, and then we're kind of once again a sitting duck to any other cars that may be behind. So again, going up the hill, we're going to try and maybe make a move, but it's just not, you know, really wise enough for me to do so. He'll eventually, you know, end up battling with us again and get him through if we do try and, you know, take that position. So it's just not worth the time overall in terms of my lap times to be battling with the Ford. It's much easier just to tuck in and follow once again, and that's exactly what we're going to do. As we're going to the right hander though, the Ford is pretty much going to begin to get itself clear of the Mercedes currently in these early stages. Tommy Hawk, he continues his charge through the field as he's up to P9 already as we go on to lap 8, almost onto lap 9. Much better racing from him and a great recovery drive. His qualifying time was absolutely fantastic. If we go down, we've got the new boy TSR Nissan as he is going to have a bit of a collision with Coda the Dragon, who basically wipes him out after some traction issues there, and poor Nissan's basically just going to catch the worst of it. As Archangel goes up through past Coda as well, that means Coda's lost a position and poor Nissan basically ends up barriered and a long way back in probably one of the more difficult cars to drive of the bunch in that Jaguar. So we're going on board with the Ferrari of Timo here, currently running P2, although he has a bit of a gap to P1 and he's not realistically going to be chasing him down anytime soon. It was interesting enough that around about 20 minutes in, we got a massive downpour of rain. As you can see, his windscreen wipers coming on and the rain begins to absolutely throw itself down. Now, it wasn't actually going to hang around long for some reason. It just pretty much came, absolutely wet the track and then passed on. So it was kind of a, you know, risk versus reward of, do you go onto the inters or do you stay on the dries and basically try and survive until the track begins to dry up. Obviously, the lower temperatures at night make this much more difficult, as the likes of Timo, I believe Jace as well, he's also going to follow. And then just behind him, we're going to have the Ford GT of Viper that's also going to pit. So at least P2, 3 and 4 are going to box in, as the M6 is all basically going to go through, and that's going to then stay out on the dries at least for now anyway. And we also have Turbo Boy, who's kind of caught out in the middle of the track. Now, an early pit stop here could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. Obviously, the rain going pretty quickly, although it did absolutely drench the track. So we have the Ferrari and the 911 both boxing in there, and then the Ford GT almost or instantly really following suit and basically getting some intermediate tyres on and getting the fuel in there, as well as the Toyota Supra of Professor Smiles, who is once again recovering after that massive barrier hit early on after he kind of put it in the gravel. So all of those cars basically pitting in for the intermediates, as well as the likes of the RA LMS of Archangel, who's now going to go in for his tyre change and almost certainly put some fuel in as well to try and go as long as possible as the track begins to dry up. As you can see already, the rain's pretty much past. It was only around for around about a minute and a half before it basically stopped entirely and then never bothered coming back. We also have the Dodge Viper as well pitting in from a while back. Turbo Boy, a lap later, he's going to manage to box himself in, come off of the soft tyres and put on a set of intermediates ready to basically, you know, tackle the wet conditions at least for the next 10 or so minutes as the track tries to dry out. Obviously the lower temperatures at night, like I did say, are going to mean that it's going to take a little bit longer than usual to essentially get that track to sort of dry conditions once again, where cars can, you know, begin to box in and go back on dry tyres. We do still have a bunch of cars though still out there on the dry compounds, although it's kind of, you know, not fully wet. It's still intermediate conditions certainly, so it's going to be a very slippy ride for the likes of myself, J Mira and co. So later on we do have Jace beginning to basically reel in Timo in the Ferrari. The Porsche does seem to suit those intermediates much more. We have myself currently in P4 and J Mira is still on the mediums in P5 with the Ford GT, which has obviously just gone for a pit stop, obviously running the intermediates. That's the one of Viper Psych. All absolutely love the lighting on that thing as it goes through. So that is the top 6 so far. Just behind that we have Coda the Dragon, again a bunch of offs early on for him, but he is beginning to get himself through the grid, as well as the GTR of Danky Seb returning from the Ferrari league, which was essentially the predecessor of this league. Nissam, he's currently inside the top 10, again believing he hasn't pitted, so again he's just trying to make up as many positions as possible after that massive shunt by Coda early on. And then we have the Viper, which we know has pitted. Is it going to manage to get through in front of the Corvette of Tommy Hawk? As you can see, it's just going through there and up the road as Tommy Hawk obviously took his pit stop, went on to the intermediates, and now he's going to try and tackle those tough conditions. We have the Aston Martin of DWG, then we have ETSK in the Subaru BRZ. Again, a bit of a tough race for him for his first full-time league race, and then just behind him we have Jody in the 750S McLaren. Now around about the halfway point, it was time for myself to do my one and only planned pit stop of the race. So we're going to go on the hards once again. We're going to go from the hards and then onto the mediums. Obviously tyre deg not as high as I assumed, so again we've lost a ton of time on the hards, but we are going to go on a, I guess, a much better and much faster compound. The only kind of downside is it was quite tough to get heat in the tyres, and overall they just don't have the life of the hards. However, with tyre deg being rather quite low, we should realistically be able to maintain our position and possibly make our way up if we do manage to get the heat into them. So as you can see, that is up, us and through, coming out the pits and maintaining P6 currently. We're then going to get Turbo Boy drop into P3 as he takes another pit stop, this time throwing off the intermediates for a dry compound of tyre. There was certainly a dry line there, so what he's going to do at this point is take another set of, I believe, soft tyres, just to allow him to basically go to the end. For some reason the softs, although they did wear off quite quickly, and they don't really have the overall life of a medium and such, they were still enough to actually last fairly deep into these races. So a little bit later on we're going to have myself in P5, and as you're going to see, we're going to begin to struggle for grip, to be quite honest. The Mercedes just really not acting quite, you know, quite how we want it on the medium compound as a tyres. It felt much more stable actually on the hards, although it was a lot slower. Then we have a battle just going on here between Professor Smiles and J Mira for P6, the Toyota Supra and the BMW M6, both on a bit of a recovery drive after their contact early on. Then Timo, he's going to then get rid of the intermediates as well as the Porsche, both cars boxing in at the same time and both essentially going onto the faster, more dry compound of tyres. Again, we're around about 35 minutes into this race. The rain is pretty much dried up at this point. There's definitely a dry line out there and there's just no real need to kind of hang around on these tyres much longer. As you can see, we also have the Ford GT just behind these pair as these pair continue to battle. As you can see, Jace just coming out behind the Ferrari at this point. The Ford GT again, you know, kind of rinsing and repeating and basically getting itself on the dry compound of tyres to go all the way to the end without needing to stop once again. So it's going to be some fuel as well. Now the Mercedes, again, we're going to be currently up in P4. We're just going to manage to jump the Ford GT. Now we do not have another planned pit stop for the race, so realistically it's kind of worked out so far on that single stop. Tommy Hawk, he's again going to continue his battling with Coda as he tries to get it down the inside into turn 1 and then the run up the hill. He's going to try and out drag him there. He is pretty much going to get that one done, so again he's going to continue his charge through the field in what was certainly one of his best drives yet whilst currently in the league. So if we look a bit further back, we have the likes of Steve in the Dodge Viper rounding out the top 10. He's currently chased down by the Nissan GTR of Danky Seb. Obviously the GTR a much more stable beast than the Dodge Viper overall. Then we have the Jaguar in P12, P13 is Archangel in the Audi R8. Then we have DWG in the Aston Martin V12 Vantage. We also have a wide running McLaren there in P15, and finally in last is ETSK in the Subaru BRZ. Now let's go on board to this battle that's been heating up for quite a while at this point. Jace has managed to get himself through the field and then get himself on the back of Timo after the pit stops. As you can see, he's currently running within the slipstream of Timo as we go on board with the Porsche. Is he going to manage to get this move done into the right-hander here? Obviously it's going to be who's going to brake latest. The Ferrari moving about a ton under braking there. However, the Porsche is going to finally get the move on the exit of the corner and get that one done. Now it's just all about if Jace can manage to get that gap to the Ferrari and basically break the slip and begin to pull away. Obviously Red Bull Ring, a very speed kind of heavy track, and it's all about kind of breaking those toes. Again, kind of the reason I went onto the hard was just hoping I could sit in someone's slipstream for as long as I realistically could, and that's exactly what Timo's going to try here. As he does close up a little bit into the left-hander there, he is still hanging onto the back of the Porsche of Jace, but you know, it is looking like the Porsche overall is just going to be the better car realistically for this track, kind of breaking away from that Ferrari as we go into these later stages with around about 20 minutes remaining. So a great drive by Jace as well, obviously early on having that contact with Tommy Hawk and, you know, being kind of finding himself in the middle of the pack as the Porsche got a very, very slow start off the line. So Timo is looking like he's lost that position for good as the gap begins to grow between the 911 and the 458. A little bit later on we're going to have a J Mira once again in the M6 coming down the inside. We're not going to battle him. Again, there's just no real point. It's just going to take out, you know, too much tyre life. We are basically just going to try and sit in the slipstream of the M6 and, you know, try our best to kind of get pulled along. But it does seem that, you know, we did have a very, very good kind of top speed in terms of the overall performance of the Mercedes. So we're just going to take a quick look. We're just going to, you know, kind of throw the dummy, see if that does anything, and it's not going to quite at this point. So again, we're just going to stay tucked in behind and basically follow the M6 all the way up to the top of the hill before we get into the right hander to see if a move's going to realistically be on. So he's going to cover off the inside line here, force us to the outside, and we're going to try and get the cut back, but it's not going to be quite on as we sort of clatter that inside curve there, and the M6 does manage to get a much better drive out and break that slip. Now realistically, this is when the tyre wear really started to kick in. With around about 10 minutes left, the Mercedes just became an absolute nightmare to drive. The medium tyres just being very, very cold, and overall wearing a much faster rate than I expected for the Mercedes AMG. As you can see, we're going to get a little bit of a slip out of the right hander there as we try and overtake some lap traffic, and then eventually this is going to allow the Ford GT of Viper to begin to catch us. As you can So you're getting it wide, getting a big kick on the grass there, and this is going to allow the Ford to just get up and past us before we get to the end of the straight down the hill into the right-hander. So we're going to tuck into the slipstream at this point. Again, the rear end of this Mercedes is absolutely slipping everywhere, and we're just going to try and hold it to the end. We are going to manage to, you know, finally come back at the Ford GT and running a slip. As you can see, myself and Vibe are just kind of, you know, playing about at this point as we're going to turn one, but we are going to manage to get this one done, diving down the inside and getting a clean overtake done on the Ford GT. However, it's not going to be long before the Ford just kind of, you know, rides on our tail and kind of gets itself pulled along on the high-speed straights, which is the best thing for that car. Obviously, as you can see, the rear end of Mercedes just absolutely slipping out at every possible opportunity, and it's almost a case of just when is this Ford going to get past. It seemed a much more stable car. We are then going to go for a bit of a trip through the gravel as the rear end just not coping well at all, and then we're going to have a very rare moment where we basically just absolutely wipe ourselves out. The rear end completely gone, the tyres just not there, and the Mercedes ends up pretty much smashed into the barrier and losing more positions. As you can see, just almost impossible to get the car going as the grass is, you know, still pretty damp at this point. Again, you don't want to be too far off of the line, and again, the core temperature is really not doing any justice for the car. So then, with nothing to realistically lose, we're just going to box in and basically go for a fastest lap. So it's going to be a set of softs this time for the Mercedes. The medium tyres just not worked out for the car, wearing much quicker than we expected and just not getting the heat in, whereas you know, we're basically just a sitting duck and almost just going to be absolutely decimated towards the end if we'd have not kind of gone onto a different compound of tyres. Just no grip at all in them. So we are going to then try our best to go for fastest lap. We are going to pick up a penalty there for going wide, as we managed to put in a 129.7, around about 129.6, around about 2/10 slower than the original fastest lap when the weather was much better and there was much more temperature on the track surface. We are then going to begin to go into a much faster territory. As you can see, we're only just kind of nearly a tenth down on our fastest, but we are riding in the slipstream of the leader, Turbo there. We are currently the faster car on track and probably the fastest overall car on track, and we are going to try and then get the move done, but you know, we're just not going to be able to unlap ourselves in time, and as we try to tuck back in, it's going to end up into a bit of carnage, just kind of misjudging the front end there and basically ending up in the side of Turbo. We are eventually though going to get that move done as we go into the left-hander, as Turbo's pretty much guaranteed the win at this point, as the 911 had actually ran out of fuel for its final lap and the 458 had already finished in P3. So it is going to be your winner, Turbo Boy. He's basically got pole, fastest lap, and he's led from start to finish, so a great job by him. The Porsche's then next in P2 as it crosses the line after doing a lap with zero fuel in the tank. We have the Ferrari of Timo coming P3, the Ford GT of Viper a very, very good P4 with the Supra just behind him of Professor Smiles. Great recovery for him. The M6 of J Mira in P6. P7 myself in the Mercedes after a pretty dreadful race. Tommy Hawk, our personal driver of the day, comes in P8 after a great recovery after that early collision, and obviously his best qualifying to date. P9 goes to Coda after his early battles with Tommy. P10 is rounded out by the GTR, then we have the R8, the Viper, the Jaguar, and then finally the V12 Vantage, rounding off that group with a P14, and the BRZ finishing in P15. As you can see there, ETSK, difficult race for him, but he does manage to get the car across the line. And then finally we have the McLaren, which had a absolutely dreadful race here at the Red Bull Ring. Now your fastest lap comes courtesy of Turbo Boy. It was done on lap 7, as you can see, and it's going to be a fantastic lap by him. The Peugeot massively suited to this track and overall a very, very stable car to drive. So it was no surprise that he got the fastest lap, although the Mercedes could have probably took it at the end with the help of a slip. We just couldn't quite clear him in time. And obviously with the clear track ahead, the Peugeot had no problem absolutely smashing in the fastest laps. As you can see, on lap 5 he did a 129.751 before doing a 129.877, and then obviously finishing up with a 129.456. Even kind of into this point of the tyres' lives, he managed to absolutely, you know, extend these tyres beyond their expected life expectancy on the softs and really make use of them. So you are going to pick up a bonus point if you do get fastest lap, and well, that's what he's done. So that means overall he comes out with 27 points, which I believe overall is the maximum. So he's took the race win, he's took the bonus point for a pole position, and he's took the bonus point for a fastest lap, meaning he's basically got the clean sweep. Obviously led every single lap, there was no faults with his drive whatsoever, and it was pretty much impossible for anyone to catch him. It just, you know, it seemed a bit of a risky tyre strategy to most people, the fact that he was on the softs, but the fact that he did manage to get them all the way to the end with no real issues during the race is absolutely fantastic. So massive congratulations to Turbo Boy for the win, pole and fastest lap. Our driver of the day though, that is going to go to Tommy Hawk, obviously putting his Corvette in his best qualifying position yet, and then one of his better race results, managing to drag the car all the way from P15 at the end of lap 1 when he had this big off here. As you can see, he's going to get in a bit of contact here with the likes of Jay Mira and one of the cars just behind him. I'm not quite sure who that was, and he's basically going to end up in the barrier and down in P15, and then obviously to finish P8 is absolutely fantastic, which means that he made plenty of moves during this hour-long race. He had plenty of battles with this guy here, Coda. Even early doors, he did manage to get some moves done after the SLS had its off. Obviously, you know, a bit, you know, I guess enthusiastic with the track limits, but he did manage to get that clear without a penalty. Then he took on the likes of the Dodge Viper, you know, kind of putting the Viper to shame against the Corvette there, getting a much better drive out than the Viper. A very unstable car that Viper is, and the Corvette's going to get itself through. So he made a ton of moves during this race, some great pit stops by him, and just kind of making everything he could possible work. Again, he's then going to make a move on Nissan, one of the new boys to the league. He's going to get himself around the Jaguar on the outside and get that one done. And later on, he's going to take on the Aston Martin of DWG. It was running really high up the grid at this point of the race, and yeah, it's just the Aston Martin did not stand a chance before having another battle once again with Coda the Dragon later on in the race, just after nightfall and the morning began to shine through. He's going to get that move done once again on the inside of turn 1 and get himself clear of that SLS, which means he did get his final finishing position of P8. Now let's have a look at the overall standings as after round 1, should I say, at the Red Bull Ring. So we have Turbo Boy taking the win, fastest lap and pole position for 27 and maximum points. P2 goes to Jace with 23, P3 to Timo with 21. Viper in the Ford GT gets a fantastic result, meaning he's on 19 points in P4. P5, a great recovery from Professor Smiles for 18 points. Jay Mira having a bit of a off race for 17 points in P6. P7, a terrible race for me, means I'm on 13 points over there in P7. P8, our driver of the day, Tony, on 11 points. P9 for Coda with 9 points. P10 for Harry Chatty or Danky Seb with 7 points. Archangel takes 5 points, and P11. P12 to Stee on 4, Tal or our new boy Nissam on 3 points for P13, DWG. He then rounds up with P14 in the Aston Martin, and that means he takes away 2 points, with P15 going to ETSK 600 on his debut or full-time debut with 1 point, and Jody is in P16 with 0 points. So that is your overall standings after round 1 at the Red Bull Ring. It was a fantastic opening race for this season. We do have 3 other leagues to come at some point during this week. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you later on, guys. Peace.